Hello and welcome to this video all about how to cure your people-pleasing. Now, according to Albert Camus, to be happy we must not be too concerned with others. Now, I don't know about you, but that most definitely rings true for me. It sounds harsh on the outside, but if you examine it, what it's really saying is that our self-worth, our approval needs to come from ourselves, not from how well we please other people. So would you class yourself as a people pleaser? Maybe one or more of these statements rings true for you. Do you find yourself constantly apologizing to the point where you feel sometimes like you're apologizing for even existing? Do you find yourself taking on far too much, saying yes when you really want to say no, but you're so worried about letting other people down or what they'll think of you that you just keep on agreeing to take on more? Do you find yourself going along with things, not really voicing your desires in order to keep other people happy because it's easier and you're trying to keep the peace? Or do you find yourself not really being true to who you are, not speaking your opinions because you're trying to fit in, you're trying to belong, you're trying not to be an outsider, and you're trying to avoid being rejected? Do you find yourself looking for external validation from other people far too often rather than relying on your own self-approval? And do you find yourself maybe taking on too much at work? Always saying yes, even though your plate is completely full, but you're just so afraid of being passed up for that promotion that you continue to say yes and continue to say yes until you are stressed, overwhelmed, and overloaded to the max. Now, if one or more of these rings true for you, then there is a little bit of people-pleasing going on. But don't worry, you are not alone. Most of us, myself included, fall into this trap of people-pleasing, suffer from the affliction of people-pleasing to some degree or another. So why does this even matter? Surely it's nice to make other people happy. Well, absolutely it is, but not to the detriment of your own well-being, your own sanity, and your own life. So what are the consequences of too much people-pleasing? Well, you lose sight of who you are. The more you comply with what other people want, the more you push your own desires and your own needs down, you lose sight of who you truly are and the life that you truly want to live. We can also become quite resentful, almost to the point of being angry with those who we feel are constantly asking too much of us, who we feel like they're always getting what they want and I'm never getting what I want. We can also find ourselves feeling extremely stressed and overwhelmed by the amount that we have on our to-do list, whether that be at work or whether that be at home. Likelihood is if we can't say no at work, we can't say no at home, and vice versa. And we can also find ourselves in friendships and in relationships that are not what we want, that can in some cases even be harmful to us because we're so worried about saying no and standing up for what we want that we allow others to treat us in a way that is just unacceptable. So where does this people-pleasing affliction come from? Where does it originate from? It's going to be different for each of us, but I believe there are some universal reasons that probably apply across the board, especially as women. So I would start off with expectations. Societal expectations of how women should be and what it means to be feminine. So research has shown that what it means to be feminine is to be thin, modest, and nice. That's what came up in the research when people were asked. So if what you want from life, if who you are doesn't comply with those three criteria, then there is a lot of external pressure to change who you are. To go against your truth in order to please other people. And then there could be learned behaviours. So maybe have a look at your role models growing up and see how they behaved, whether they stood in their truth no matter what other people thought, or whether they were continuously worrying about what other people thought and whether they were continuously passing judgment on other people, saying what they thought about other people. Two sides of the same coin, but it equates to the same thing, which is putting far too much stock in other people's opinions. Maybe we have a lack of self-worth, a lack of self-esteem. Maybe we need external validation from others because we don't feel worthy as we are. We don't feel we deserve what we want in life. So we're constantly seeking to please others in order to get that validation. And maybe we just don't know what we want. Maybe we have actually spent so long going along with others, pleasing others, that we've lost sight of what we want. Maybe we're afraid of confrontation and afraid of rejection. Maybe we're worried that if we do stand up and say who we are and what we want, that we are going to cause conflict that we want to avoid, or that we will be rejected and that we will be unlovable. I think at the base of all of these reasons for people pleasing is a fundamental fear of not being loved, which is something that is natural, it's ingrained in all of us. It's a survival mechanism from the times when we needed to be surrounded by a tribe in order to survive. So if we go it alone, if we become the outlier, the outsider, then there is that fear of just not being able to survive by ourselves. So how do we go about combating this? How do we change our people-pleasing behaviour? Well, I'd say firstly, we need to approve of ourselves. We need to no longer be looking for that external validation constantly from other people. We need to not be reliant on external validation. We have to be okay with who we are, whether other people think we're okay or not. I know, easier said than done, but it's a practice that we have to incorporate into our lives in order to live a life that's true to ourselves. And we also have to know what we want. If we don't know what we want, then we will inevitably end up going along with others, pleasing others, because we don't have clarity, we don't have enough clarity about what we want, who we are, and what's okay for us and what's not okay for us. Which leads me on to setting boundaries. So we need to have clear boundaries in place in all areas of our life. And a boundary is basically just knowing what's okay for us and what is not okay for us. And it's very difficult to set a boundary if we don't know what's okay for us and what's not okay for us. So I would recommend, if you haven't ever thought about this before, taking some time, thinking about the things in life that really push your buttons when you find yourself in those people-pleasing situations, and really drill down and figure out, why does that bother me so much? What is it that's not okay for me in that situation? And then you're going to be able to start to figure out your boundaries. So for instance, for me, when someone is repeatedly late or repeatedly lets me down, that is not okay for me. So I have an option. I can either have a conversation with that person to discuss it. I can ignore it and continue to get more and more annoyed with that person when they continue to not show up. Or I can just decide that I know that that person's unreliable, so I won't make any plans where they have to be somewhere at a certain time in a certain place in order for us to catch a train, get on a flight, go to an event, and I will just change the way that I interact with that person. So have a think about what your boundaries might be, what's okay for you and what is not okay for you. And the important thing with our boundaries is that other people cannot tell us that we are wrong for having those boundaries. Now, boundaries are different than barriers. Barriers are unspoken. Boundaries are things that we communicate clearly. And if anybody tries to tell you that your boundaries, i.e. your standards, are too high, then that's their issue and not yours. Because the thing is, when we compromise our boundaries, when we let them be crossed, they don't change. They stay the same and we end up falling into resentment. And the thing with boundaries is they are not easy to set, especially if we haven't been used to setting boundaries. So don't expect yourself to go into this if it's something you've never done before and find it easy and simple. The reason that many people don't set boundaries is because it's not easy to do. And just get used to the fact, get comfortable with the fact that it is probably going to be messy and it is going to be uncomfortable to begin with. But unless you start now, you're just going to continue in the same cycle of people pleasing. And the earlier that we start to set boundaries, so say for instance when you meet someone new, the earlier you let them know what's okay for you and what's not okay for you, the better. It is so much easier to set a boundary at the beginning of a relationship than it is, say, 3, 4, 5 years in, when the other person is going to be completely astonished at this new you that has shown up. Not to say that you shouldn't start, however, but what you might want to do is start small. Start with something that's really simple and easy, and also make sure that you're in an energy of love, an energy of calmness when you are expressing your boundary, if at all possible. Try not to do it with aggression. So you can use phrases like, would you be willing to, would it be okay for you if, and just try and approach them in as soft a manner as possible. Same thing goes with saying no. If you have not been saying no for a long time, then start small. Start with something that's not really that important and kind of build up your no muscle as you progress onto things that might be more difficult for you to say no to. And when you are saying no, please do not apologise. Do not say, I'm really sorry, but I hope you don't mind if I talked about this in my video on asking for what you want, and the same applies when you're saying no. Don't give this long-winded explanation as to why you're saying no. Keep it really short, really simple, give them the facts, and then if they want more information, they can ask for it. But when we start to go into massive long explanations, that's when our willpower might fail, and we perhaps come across as not being the assertive person that we want to be seen as. And the other thing I'd like to say about boundaries and saying no and people pleasing in general is that in every moment we are teaching people what's okay for us and what's not okay for us. So if we continue to say yes to things when we don't want to, how on earth is the other person meant to know that that's not okay for us until we explode several months or years down the line from having been people-pleasing far too often? And, this comes as a massive shock to whoever is on the receiving end of it. So in every moment, just remember that you are teaching other people how to treat you. And if this fear of being rejected crops up, this fear of losing someone from your life maybe, or fear of creating a confrontation comes up, then I would say acknowledge it, because it's a natural feeling, but don't let it get in the way of living your truth, of living a life according to who you are, not the life that somebody else wants you to live. So I just want to end by saying this takes courage. It's vulnerable to express what we want and to not know how other people are going to respond. And that is why, as I said, many people just avoid doing this, and instead they fall into resentment and anger and judgment of other people. Now, if you want a mantra to help you when you are setting boundaries, when you're saying no, then I can't give you anything better than Brené Brown's mantra of choose discomfort over resentment. I've used this, and what it does for me is it reminds me, do I want to choose a momentary discomfort, or do I want to choose long-term resentment? And so far, when I have been present enough to use this, I have always chosen that momentary discomfort over long-term resentment. And ultimately, it comes down to what is more important to you. Is it more important to you to please other people? Is it more important to you to have the approval of other people constantly? Or is it more important to you to live your truth, to live your life according to who you are and what you want? So I hope that that has been useful for you, and I very much look forward to hearing your comments and hearing how this has landed for you, and also I look forward to speaking to you again in next week's video.